Hi everyone, in this lesson we're going to look at what posh is, who are posh people, and also look at the language of posh people. But let me start with what is posh, because maybe you haven't heard of it. This is, I would say, something specific to England because it has to do with the class system here. And the class system is how the society is organised from top to bottom. Not in some kind of official way, like you get a piece of paper that says what class you're in, but it is the family you're born into, and it has an impact on the kind of school you go to, on the kind of job you do when you grow up. So although it's not an official formal thing, it's something that affects life in the UK for English people. Or I said the UK there, life in England for English people, and it's still in the rest of the country, but I'm not sure how strong it is there or how it is different. I'm talking about the English perspective. Okay, so starting with a diagram here of the different classes in England, this is not to scale, this is an estimate of how big the different classes are, the different social classes. So if we start at the top with the crown, that's where the queen would be. She's at the top because she's the queen. Then this first chunk here, U, means upper class. It's quite small compared to the rest. Here are all the people, all the 60 million or however many people are here. And here is the upper class. A small amount of people is at the top. Next, we have the upper middle class, and that's a bit bigger. Next, we have the middle class. And now we're almost around half the population, a bit less when we include the middle class. Then we have the working class. That's the biggest section. And the precariat. This is a new class. I'll explain about it after. So going back to the top, how would we recognise these different groups of people? How would we know who they are? Well, as a native-born English person, you just know, and you can tell. It's the language people use, it's how they dress, it's the job they do, things like that. But let's talk about jobs. What kind of jobs would these people do, as an example? So an upper class person, in the past, upper class people didn't work. They didn't need to work because they inherited their money. But nowadays, they do work a lot of the time. So they might do jobs like being the head of a charity, or they might work in banking in the city, or they might be, many actors are from upper class backgrounds. So they tend to do jobs with really, really high status, social power, and even better if it makes a lot of money as well. Next, we have the upper middle class. These are people who do things like a surgeon. A surgeon would be upper middle class. An architect would be upper middle class. Professions that earn them a lot of money. And the professions that are hard to get into as well. Next, the middle class. Middle class, first thing that comes to mind is teacher and managers in businesses, middle class. Working class would be the jobs such as tradespeople jobs, bricklayer, electrician, roofer, a nurse. Working class. Those that I mentioned, those are skilled working class jobs. The working class could also, the lower part of the working class could also include jobs that like working in retail working in retail, being a farmer, things, but not owning the farm. If you own the farm, you're up here, but if you work on the farm, you're here. Now, because the class system changes and evolves, it's called working class, right? But many of the people in the working class don't actually work. They get money from the government and they don't go to work. They're on benefits. Sometimes it's because the people can't get a job. They don't have any skills, really. No one wants to give them a job at all. Or if they do find work, it's very temporary. It's just a few days and then the job's finished. And the job doesn't have any good benefits to working there. Benefits in the sense of earning a pension, and it's not stable, things like that. If your job's like, it's not secure, or you have no job and no one will give you a job, you would be in what's called the precariat class. A precariat means it's not stable here. So yeah, bear that in mind. English people can just tell generally where other people are in here. And a good question to answer now is also, how much does it change in a person's life? You know, are you sort of born here and then you climb all the way up to the top by becoming successful or becoming rich? Well, it doesn't really happen a lot. There is flexibility. Some people go up to a profession much higher than their parents were in, than the situation they were born in. But the thing about class is that a great extent of it is how you are born. So over here in England, it's not only just about how much money you've got, it's where you're born. So we have very, very wealthy people. For example, David Beckham and his wife, Victoria Beckham, who's called Posh Spice, they must be super millionaires, but they are not considered upper class or upper middle class. Well, depending on I don't know where to put them, but they've got all the money to live up here or really high up here, but their personalities haven't really changed so much to make them different kind of person. So it could be really different in your country, depending on whether the social hierarchy is so old in a sense. We've been doing this for a really long time over here in England because of the Queen and all that. So now we've got that out of the way. Now let's go and talk about posh actors. How can you find examples of posh people and their language? We could look for movies with these actors in, because these will give you good examples if you like the way that the posh actors speak, and you can learn to speak more like them. So there's Benedict Cumberbatch. He was in the series Sherlock, and that character he plays in Sherlock is posh, but in all his other movies as well, he plays posh characters. Tom Hiddleston, he was in the movie War Horse. He played somebody posh in that. There's a film that came out a few years ago called The Riot Club or The Riot Club, and this was about students from Oxford University, which is the top university or the second top university, that if you're posh, that's one of the best universities to go to. So the film is about how those students live and how they it's about what life is like for you if you're rich at one of those very, very top schools. Then we have Tilda Swinton. She is quite an arty kind of actress. Doesn't necessarily always play the super posh character in the film, but she is a genuine, real posh person from her family background. So she's an example of a upper class person who's an actress. And then there's Keira Knightley. And when Keira Knightley was younger and in many films, she was always playing Jane Austen kinds of characters in her films. So that's a good sign. If you see those traditional English movies with the big dresses and old-fashioned speaking, that's a good sign that the actor or actress is posh or from a posh background. Usually those kind of films get those kind of actors and actresses. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the thing. We're talking about posh people and the language they use. The hard thing to do about it when you try and do a lesson on it is that you don't really meet many people who admit to being posh and say, oh yeah, I'm posh. You don't really admit it. And I think it's the case today that many people who are from posh backgrounds adapt their language down when they're around the normal people, so they don't speak really posh. So it's hard for you to hear it and catch exactly how posh people speak now. Plus, having distance really helps. So it's hard to see it right now, how posh people speak now. But 20 years later, when you look back, maybe it's easier to say and say, oh, posh people spoke like this. So what I'm going to talk about now is how posh language was thought of and perceived back in the past. Okay, so this comes from 1955, this discussion about how posh people speak, from the writing of Nancy Mitford. Nancy Mitford was a journalist and a kind of socialite, upper class socialite from those times. And one of the things she did was write about, one of the things she's famous for is writing about U and non-U language. U language means upper class language. Non-U language means not upper class. And these people are the social climbers. They could be the middle class people who earn more money and sort of climbing up. And these could be the upper middle class people as well, who are spending time with the upper class people. So what this means is whoever was not born in the upper class and had the right education and spent time in the right schools learning all the correct upper class language, if you were not like that, then your language would sound like you don't belong there. Your language would give you away as not really belonging in the upper class parties or wherever you go. So let's look at the signs. According to Nancy Mitford in 1955, how we can describe non-U language, not upper class, the people climbing up, they spoke in a way that was refined, fashionable, fancy, and they used French origin words. So if we look at those descriptions, that sounds, well, yeah, I'd like to speak like that. It all sounds good, doesn't it? Refined, it's like elegant. French origin words sound sophisticated. And they would use words such as serviette, toilet, and they would say pardon when they want to say, what did you say? Now this all sounds good, But Nancy Mitford says this looks bad. This makes you look like you really don't belong here. You shouldn't speak like this. And anyone who is really posh does not speak this way. It's not what you expect. If you are upper class, if you're like Nancy Mitford, your language is more direct. You say what it is. You've got nothing to prove. You know that you're upper class. You know that you come from a good family. You know that your family has connections. You know you have all the money you need. So you're not trying to be refined or elegant like these people or fashionable. You don't care. You have all the status you need. You don't need to try hard with your language. And what's interesting about the upper class for this time in 1955 was that in Nancy Mitford's opinion, is that they used many of the same words as the working class people. So the upper class people back at that time were using a lot of the same words as the working class people, because these were the traditional words of the thing that they were saying. Whereas these ones were changing their language to sound better in their opinion. Oh, this is the right way to speak. But they were trying a little bit too hard. So Nancy Mitford said this is how we know the difference between someone who is really upper class and someone who's just trying. Now we've got some example words coming up. Let's look at some examples of upper class words compared to non-upper class words. The first words are all to do with things in the home. So the upper class word is house, and in Nancy Mitford's opinion, the non-upper class word is home. They're synonyms, we use them in the same way, but one word shows that you belong here with the queen, and the other word shows that you climbing up higher. Next we have drawing room and sitting room. These are the room in your house where you entertain people when they come to visit. The non-upper class people would say lounge. And if we remember that the non-upper class people like words that have the French origin or sound more refined, because lounge comes from French. This is why it's attractive for them to use. Next we have lavatory, and lavatory is generally shortened to loo. This is still saying where's the loo is still even though this was 1955, it's still one of the things to show how posh is someone, because there are many people who can only say the word loo or lavatory, and they can't say that word toilet. They have to avoid saying that word. It's too low. So yeah, this one is still the case. Toilet comes from French as well. Toilette comes from French. Sofa is where you sit in your lounge and watch the television. If you're upper class, you probably never watch television. But they do have sofas. Whereas the non-upper class people would sit on their settees or couches. But settee is even lower than couch, I would say, in my sense of it. Next, in 1955, the upper class people said looking glass. I'm going to look in the looking glass at my reflection. But I don't think they say it now. If you're upper class, please let me know whether you say looking glass, because I don't know. I need your feedback on this one. These days, do you still say looking glass? Whereas the non-upper class people said mirror. And when they go to restaurants or when they're eating, The upper class people would use their napkin, you know, very, very gently. And the non-upper class people would probably go like that or something, you know. Or maybe just use their hand. Anyway, the word they would use is serviette. So these words are grouped together now. We're moving on from the home. The upper class word is to say you feel sick. I'm feeling terribly sick. But if you're not upper class, you say ill. I'm ill. Next, the upper class people, because they're more direct and they say what they see, or they tell it how it is, at least in those times, they would say a person is rich, he's got lots of money, he's absolutely stinking rich. Whereas the non-upper class people would say wealthy. Wealthy. Wealthy is more of a sophisticated kind of word, and it's even though it means about money, in a way it's not so much about money. Rich makes us imagine piles of gold coins in a way that wealthy doesn't. Next, upper class people talk about false teeth. Obviously, back in 1955, there were a lot more people who had false teeth because especially in England, you know what our dentists are like here. So they lost a lot of their teeth, and they didn't have them unless they wore the false teeth. Whereas the non-upper class people, they said dentures. I believe that probably comes from French. Let me know in the comments. Upper class people said spectacles, not glasses. And they would talk about riding their bike or bicycle, whereas the non-upper class people would say cycle. And when it came to eating, the upper class people would say pudding, whereas the non-upper class people said dessert. So we are many years on from 1955 now. Definitely some of the examples in this lesson don't apply anymore. For example, looking glass. But I think it's true that in our times there still is vocabulary that upper class people use that's specific to them, that perhaps people who don't come from their social group or who didn't go to their schools with them, people just don't know this language that they use. They wouldn't know what's the right word to say because they just haven't been around all the other people that say those words. If you didn't go to the expensive school, you just wouldn't learn it. And like I said at the beginning of the lesson, upper class people these days often change their language down to talk to the normal people. So it's hard to know it would be very interesting to know, but hard to find out what are the words such as this today. It would be really interesting to know, but personally I don't know. So that's another if you've got any examples, you could leave a comment of words that you know are posh that people use today in the upper class. So thank you for watching, and what you can do now is the quiz on this lesson. See you again soon. Bye.